Yeah, I'm pleased to be joined by Judy Johnson, Project Director for Prosperity's Front Door. Is that correct?
That's right.
And former mayor of Plymouth, Minnesota, and a member of the Metropolitan Council, and, and many other things on your resume that I could probably list, but don't have time right now to go through the whole thing. But I know you're very well versed in issues related to housing, and one thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about today was just the idea of workforce housing and what the needs are here in the Twin Cities and beyond. So I guess if you wouldn't mind, could you just start maybe by talking a little bit about just, I guess, defining the need and talking about workforce housing compared to I guess, affordable housing and how that is different?
You bet. Kind of to just level set, how I got involved through Prosperity's Front Door, and as it relates to workforce housing and housing for all, Prosperity's Front Door is really an extension of the work that the Governor's Task Force on Housing did a couple of years ago, and they released their report that has 6 housing goals and about 30 recommendations. And with that, the group wanted to ensure that there was another body of work that would help track that and promote those goals. And part of my responsibility, being the project director, is to help expand the base and understanding of the issues that we are facing around housing. And while we have a lot of wonderful activists and stakeholders that are working so hard each and every day in the housing community, there's a whole bunch of other people around the state that really don't understand that connection and how it relates to all of the sectors in our economy, people's future prosperity, economic and social justice. So that's the space that I'm working in. So for me, it's a great opportunity to maybe help connect the dots for people, and help people to understand that it's really so foundational to everything that I think we want for our state, and our economic competitiveness going forward. Your question's really a good one. Having been in local government for over 20 years, having been a housing advocate for that length of time as well, there's a lot of definitions around housing. So affordable housing and workforce housing are very interchangeable. And I would say this about affordable housing, as I've come to appreciate it over the years. As people, it's very rare that we are born and die in the same home, and live that entire span of our lifetime in the same housing unit. So really, when we talk about affordable housing, it's really about ensuring that our state has an ample supply of all types of housing across all regions and parts of Minnesota, to ensure that first-time home buyers, frontline workers, people that are moving up through their career and looking to expand their household, people that want different options, whether it be a rural life, a suburban life, a metro life, whatever it might be. For people that are more affluent, we're very blessed in Minnesota to have all these corporate headquarters and Fortune 500s and a robust economy here, pre-COVID certainly, and we've been tested through the Great Recession. But having housing for all of those people that are part of our economy is essential. When we talk about workforce housing, we're really thinking about the people that are part of that economic engine that drives our state's economy. And without ensuring that we've got an adequate supply of all types of housing available and ready to people, we start to jeopardize some of those fundamentals for community prosperity, our state's economic competitiveness, and then certainly individual household prosperity. So workforce housing tends to track very well with affordable housing, but a lot of people don't understand who is that. And in my years of service, it's your teacher, it's your firefighter, it's the person who makes your coffee every day that you appreciate so much so that you can get going and get something accomplished in your day. It's people that are new to our community, that are setting up roots in our community, just like the people before my family. I had ancestors that moved here, and new community members, longtime community members. And it really also encompasses, people that are at the end of, their professional career and trying to downsize and manage a more limited budget. But it really does, again, speak to the importance of housing for all people, because, a good number of people are working 2, 3, and 4 jobs just to make ends meet. And certainly within the converging crisis we're facing right now, it's becoming more and more difficult. And that needs to be paid attention to, because it's important for economic recovery, but there's all kinds of other components that are really important to the people of the state of Minnesota.
Yeah, and this has been a challenge for a long time, but especially now during the pandemic and the economic downturn, this is really even more so than ever, I assume, a great challenge for our society, right?
Absolutely. So, pre-pandemic, according to Minnesota Housing Partnership's 2019 State of Housing Report, over 1 in 4 families across the state were housing cost burdened. That's over 500,000 people that are paying well over 30% of their income. So, housing costs have to compete with food and student loans and, healthcare needs and just essential things that, people need to survive each and every day. And additionally, we never really fully recovered from the Great Recession. So we have a significant housing shortage, that our state was facing pre-COVID and pre-racial injustice. And, while we were making some progress on that, a goal is to really, over the next 10 years, produce 300,000 more new units across the state, about 50,000 more a year. And that's a steep challenge. Again, we just didn't rebound in other ways that the economy did coming out of the Great Recession. So what we have is a housing shortage of all types. But when you really put the pressure on people who are making 80% or 60% or 30% of the area median income, and those are working people, the availability of housing options for them is very much compressed. And then with job loss and income loss, you see people that are teetering on great housing instability, eviction, foreclosure, and then that really positions our economy and our workforce to be teetering on a brink of, can we come back from this? So we're fortunate in that the state, through unemployment benefits and through the CARES Act, the governor allotted $100 million recently for CARES Act funding for that, for those households that are struggling with needing rent assistance or mortgage assistance. And certainly with the recent CDC moratorium for evictions for renters that'll go through the end of the year, that helps, but it's not the permanent solution. And what we're trying to promote in our work through our stakeholders is to, find sustainable solutions, view housing as essential infrastructure, and how can we help the private market meet the demand, but also just recognize that it's going to take public investment, increased public investment, and nonprofits and the private sector stepping up, and that's happening.
Well, yeah, and I think one thing that sometimes gets lost in these conversations is that when renters get relief to avoid being evicted, that helps the building owners as well to pay their mortgages and so on, correct?
Absolutely. And, of the 6 goals, and I can go over them in a minute, but, preserving the affordable homes we have. So those apartment units, those developments that are out there that are providing really great opportunities for affordable housing, we want to keep all of that system secure and keep those payments coming. So it helps to stabilize, but we haven't figured out the permanent solution. And I know we're working towards building back our economy, but it's not going back, it's going forward to the new economy and thinking differently about how we're going to weave in ensuring all people have access to jobs, all people have access to housing. And, through the converging crises of COVID, and then, racial injustice and racism that's woven into many of our systems, and certainly the housing system included. When 50% of Black workers are filing for unemployment, alarm bells should be going off. When Black, Indigenous, and people of color are disproportionately impacted by these crises, and it's all being exacerbated by the challenges we're facing. We need to really be concerned about that, so that as we move through economic recovery, we really look at equity, and we really work at building a new systems that work for all people. And when it comes to economic competitiveness, well, first of all, I would say housing justice is racial justice, is social justice. It's all woven together. Unfortunately, Minnesota ranks so poorly when it comes to disparities around homeownership with BIPOC households, education gaps, again, with minority communities, we're at the bottom of the list. And that translates into suppressed economic opportunity and opportunity for prosperity and generational wealth building. So, we believe and we know that housing is foundational to all of that. You don't have good health, well-being, security, opportunity for you and anybody else in your household unless you have housing stability. So it really does go back to the idea of, greater competitiveness, for our metro region and regions across the state, because this is an issue facing every part of Minnesota. Greater Minnesota is impacted hugely by this. You've got communities where businesses are trying to expand. They have a shortage of workers. The economies are such that if you try to build new housing for people, the cost to build the home ends up being higher than the actual valuation at the end of the day, and financing becomes nearly impossible. Ensuring again that we try to protect and preserve the affordable housing we have, and naturally occurring affordable housing, I might add. And that's where business leaders and communities have really had to come together and think, very strategically and innovative ways, because at the end of the day, it's about, saving Minnesota's communities across the state and ensuring that workers can be attracted to live in those communities. And the same goes for the metro area. So, it's just something that has to be placed as a priority, and has to be part of the foundation of moving forward, and not seen as something that's a nice to have, or it takes care of itself, or it's that siloed thing. The business community, really needs to start to recognize, what issues are the workers having within their organizations that are causing instability.
Yeah, I've heard many times from employers throughout the state, and as you mentioned, in Greater Minnesota as well, that's certainly part of that they need workers, but they also need a place for the workers to live, and a place that the worker can afford too. So it really does have an impact throughout the economy, I'm sure. And what are some of the other solutions that we can look at? I mean, one thing would be, what about the impact of a bonding bill? I know this is supposed to be a bonding year, and we haven't had a bonding bill passed yet. How helpful would that be to get some of those resources into the system?
Well, it's extremely important. We do rely on bonding in bonding years, and sometimes there's been bonding in non-bonding years. But that's the money that would be available next year to be let out through Minnesota Housing through a competitive process, request for proposal process, with a lot of scoring and things going on, because there's always an oversubscribed need, right? So whatever we put in is going to be put out in short order to really important projects across the state that can fill the need for our lowest income housing needs, mixed income housing projects, senior housing projects, addressing our homelessness problem across the state, which, again, with COVID and our economic crisis now, I mean, when working people, and we know this because it's already happening, has been happening across the state, not just in metro and suburbs, but in every part of the state, regional centers, small communities. When economic stability increases, so does homelessness. And I think we've probably all heard where, you know, families have kids, they're trying to keep them in schools, they're living household to household if they're staying with relatives, or sometimes they're living out of their cars. And the governor is very committed to ending homelessness in the state. He put out his ending homelessness is, you know, initiative last winter because, you know, with the harsh climates we have, you know, it's unbearable. And, you know, for me, serving on the Met Council, we know that homeless people are trying to survive, and they show up in all kinds of places trying to stay out of the cold and shelter in buses and trains and wherever they can. But the need is always greater than the resources. And we've seen that this summer. You know, again, great innovation and great partnerships have been forged to deal with the concerns, keeping our homeless neighbors safe, because now they're at risk of getting COVID, and you know that spreads then into overall community well-being. So we believe that, you know, housing equals health and health equals housing and well-being. So that money is critically important. And while we are facing economic instability, you know, right now bond rates are extremely low. I mean, it's just historically low. So when we think about the future needs, they're not going to go away. They are rising. They will continue to rise until we find out, you know, how to address this in a more comprehensive way with many solutions brought to the table. But housing and passing a bonding bill is extremely important. If we don't get that done, it just pushes the problem further off, and it doesn't change the fact that people are going to be struggling immensely without the resources in the future.
From the perspective of a former mayor of a large Twin Cities suburb, what role can local governments play in these efforts?
You know, I really subscribe to the belief that, you know, local governments have great ability to see things happen. Even in my Met Council role, you know, we work to accept the comprehensive plans. That's the guiding and zoning that overlays a community and how they map it out and plan it out. But it's really the local authorities, those elected officials, that will help to implement their goals. So first of all comes goal setting. Is you know, housing a priority in your community, and for who, and for you know, what income levels. There are goals that the Met Council has put together, certainly to meet the needs, not only now, but as we forecast population growth and needs in the future. So as a local elected official, you know, I was just a big believer that, you know, we have to have housing for all people in all circumstances, because many people are just a paycheck or one health issue away from having, you know, the rug pulled out from under them and falling into great insecurity. So, you know, it just starts with finding the partners, finding the developers, getting that guiding and zoning in place, putting your tools together, and pushing hard with the community around proposed developments, whether it be adjacent neighborhoods, the faith community, nonprofits, and building an understanding of, you know, who can we be serving in neighborhoods that are more diverse as far as mixed incomes, or focusing on those with greatest needs, so that they have the same access to schools and parks and you know, the amenities that maybe so many of the rest of us take for granted. So I believe that most local officials are really doing heroic efforts. You can see it each and every day in the work that's been taking place over many years, but certainly in the crises that we're facing now, new partnerships have been forged. But there's much more work to do. And quite honestly, the funding gaps that exist, even for projects, developments, good neighborhoods that have been approved, that will meet some of those affordability goals or help achieve some of those goals, there's still gap funding it's a pipeline. And that's why, back to your earlier question about bonding, there are projects waiting that have already been approved, and the community is ready to, do a ribbon cutting one of these days, and yet they're held up. And when projects get held up, costs don't usually go down either. So it makes a tough struggle, but it really does start with local communities embracing, homes for all, and working their tails off to see that it happens. And I'm really proud of local communities. It's tough. Not all of it comes to fruition, because sometimes you feel like you're on life support trying to get those developments approved, and they don't all make it. But I think there's a deep understanding of what we're up against, and I appreciate the work.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think there is a stigma associated with some of this type of housing, and the NIMBY factor comes in. And I mean, I personally try to impart to my children, when I see a new multifamily development or low-income housing under construction in my community, that, hey, great, we're getting some new neighbors. This is wonderful. And I just think, how do you turn that around? And I guess, is it just about education? Like you said before, we're talking about teachers and retail workers and police officers, and just looking to move in and find a place that they can afford. So and
I think that's part of it. There is a stigma. There is the not in my backyard syndrome, the NIMBYism, as we like to call it, I guess. But when you're talking about 80% of AMI, I mean, that's still a pretty decent wage, especially for even people coming out of college with a 4-year degree. I mean, they've got a lot of them have that heavy student loan debt. And, again, they become housing cost burdened, even though on paper they could probably get into, a unit that's market rate, especially if they're, sharing or have a roommate. But, it's really amazing that a lot of our frontline workers, and especially when you think about who's considered an essential worker through COVID and through this economic insecurity, it's the people that are taking care of our children. It's the people who are teaching our children. It's the people who are caring for our elderly. It's the people who are caring for our sick people. It's the people who, are transit workers, making sure that the essential workers can get to their jobs during the health crisis. It's the people that are, working in the grocery stores, making sure that, we all can get the food we need every day. And that's why in the BIPOC communities, they tend to be the majority populations in those types of jobs, and they have higher exposure rates. So when you look at the whole system, including the housing system, we have to start to recognize the importance of all people in an economy, and the pride that each person brings to the work that they're doing, and the impact and the importance on all of us that it has. And realign, I think, our values when we work to rebuild systems that work for everybody. And assign pride to developments that address low income, moderate income, or mixed incomes, and celebrate that in our communities.
Well, is there anything else you can say specifically about Prosperity's Front Door and any specific initiatives you're working on now, or kind of what's on your plate these days?
Well, essentially what we're trying to do is, again, expand the understanding, and especially into the business community. It's hard right now because, with COVID, many of our businesses, large and small, are just trying to keep their doors open, and many of them aren't able to keep their doors open. But, as we think more globally about workforce and what workers are going through and how essential they are to our business community, how can we all come around this? How can all sectors play a role? This is not just a government role or a nonprofit role. There are no single solutions to the challenges we face to ensure that people across the state have the safe and accessible, sustainable, secure housing that they need. And so we are calling on all sectors, all leaders to, talk about this within your organizations. And the Itasca project, which is, the CEO and civic nonprofit leaders who, organized themselves kind of in the early to mid 2000s to really look at the states and the metro regions' opportunities and challenges, came up with several different things. One being economic competitiveness, and therefore Greater MSP was born, which is the metro regions. Actually, it's a 15-county region that looks at how do we compete globally for talent, and housing is fundamental to that. One of the pillars of the new economic framework that was just adopted as a result of work between Greater MSP, the Center for Economic Inclusion, led by founding CEO Tawana Black, and then the Met Council has as one of its pillars affordability, where housing sits. So if we want to compete as a region, we're not growing our population, naturally on our own. We have to import talent to this state and to the region. And in order to do that, we have to be an attractive place that people will want to come from around the globe to work here. And housing affordability and stability is part of that. So that's where, our work has dotted lines to the other groups that are working on that. And I know the Itasca project has had in place the Housing Task Force, and they'll be releasing their report now very soon, this month. And I know Finance and Commerce will get, one of the first looks at that. And I'm really hopeful, because I think they are really coming around the crisis and the challenges we are experiencing as a state and a region, to talk about what should the business leader role, what should the employer role be in this, and how they can bring their resources to bear.
Well, great. Well, we'll certainly look for that report coming up. And before I let you go, is there anything else you'd like to touch on, or any other anything else you'd like to say to our listeners?
If people would like to read the task force report, again, it's 2 years old. It was pre-COVID, but it's that baseline. They can go to frontdoorcampaign.org. Also on our website, Prosperity's Front Door released Minnesota's first ever housing scorecard last February. So it starts to track progress on each of the 6 goals that we are working to achieve. The first goal, commit to homes as a priority. The second goal, preserve the affordable homes we have. Goal 3, build more homes. We have that huge shortage, and we're losing ground. Increase home stability, surrounding the people that are facing instability, and find those services and resources to keep them in their homes. Link homes and services for those people that need greater support. And then support and strengthen home ownership. And again, that's working to reduce the large gap that exists between BIPOC households and white households, which, in February we were tracking last year was 36%. That gap has widened. So people can look at the scorecard too. And, if there are any questions, my contact information is available, and I can shoot some resources or ways to engage in the work. And we appreciate the opportunity from Finance and Commerce to keep and continue to raise and elevate the importance of housing as foundational to all aspects of individual, community, and our state's prosperity and economic competitiveness.
Well, great. And thank you, Judy. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck with your work. And let's stay in touch on future initiatives.
Will do. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks. Take care.